I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture. And of course, we're here today on 980 CJME and 650 CKOM. It is great to be back with you. Hope you had yourself a great week. It was very busy. We got some rainfall in parts of Saskatchewan. We've also got a lot of seeders rolling and trying to get that crop in the ground, which is great to see. It is May. It's going to be mid-May next week. So it's about that time, right? It's about that time. Today on RealAg on the Weekend, we're going to hear from Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. We're going to hear about the cattle markets, what's been happening, what do you need to know going forward, for sure. And we're also going to hear today a piece of my conversation I had with Ranulf Glanville earlier this week on RealAg Radio. He's with Grainfox, talking about trying to steer through these current market conditions. There's a lot of different geopolitical stuff hanging over us right now. What are some of the things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to marketing? If you still have some old crop in the bin, congratulations, boy, it's in some pretty firm hands to hold on this long. But more so, I'm a little bit more interested in what people do with some of their new crop marketings here in this current environment. And we'll also have today some perspectives on manure from RealAgriculture's agronomist, Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. Of course, he's also the host of Wheat Pete's Word. That is a podcast where a new episode drops every single Wednesday. You can phone into a number, ask Pete a question, and he answers it in the podcast. That's every Wednesday. It's called Wheat Pete's Word, so please check that out if you get some time. Now, we were talking about seeding earlier, and the Saskatchewan crop update came out from the provincial government. And in that report, it says that seeding was delayed in the month of April due to cool weather and spring snowstorms. Fields had to warm up and dry out before work could begin. The provincial seeding progress of 9% is behind the 5-year average of 23%. So we're at 9. The 5-year average is 23. Seeding is furthest advanced in the southwest, west central, and northwest regions. Seeding progress is slower in the eastern regions where snowfall was heavier and water in fields is taking longer to disappear. It does sound, as I'm talking to growers, that like usual, Saskatchewan seems to be a real hodgepodge when it comes to a lot of variable conditions is what I'm talking about there for sure. The winter snowfall was rated as 34% above normal, 48% normal, and 18% below normal. Livestock producers in areas that did not receive adequate snowfall are anticipating minor to moderate water shortages over the next 2 months if they do not receive a significant rainfall. So still some areas really, really looking for some moisture. Here's the one thing, okay? When we talk about seeding progress, in this case where we're definitely behind the 5-year average, the reality is, and I think really in Saskatchewan, for a lot of you listening, this is really, really true. Is our ability, like if you think back 30 years ago, okay, especially say 50 years ago, if we were at 9% and the 5-year average was 23, it would be a little bit like, oh boy, how are we going to catch up? This crop is late. Oh my goodness, we're off to a terrible start. With today's scale of equipment, in a province like Saskatchewan, if we get numerous days here in a row where there is no rain and things dry up in some of these parts that are a little bit behind and pushing that number lower, that gap closes fast, really fast. And we see this in the U.S. when it comes to corn planting. All it takes is a 1 week of really good weather, and that gap is closed, right? Because obviously equipment's bigger. We've got some farms that run 24 hours. That's another factor as well. So I don't know how much the markets or we should put into that seeding progress number, but it's definitely something that is things have changed over time. Yesterday on RealAg Radio, we were talking about this, and I had made the comparison from seeding, like our ability to get things done from a capacity standpoint in seeding versus harvest. And although there's been a lot of capacity expansion when it comes to, say, new combines, like say that John Deere X9, okay, that huge capacity of that machine. Now, everyone doesn't have one, so it's not widespread capacity increase. And some of the other models and manufacturers, they've done their own jump up in capacity. But if we think about the jump up in capacity and compare harvest versus seeding, I think we've made bigger gains when it comes to seeding. I think we've. Do you see what I mean by that? Does that make sense? That if you compare ourselves now to 30 years ago, there's a lot more efficiency been gained on the seeding front when it comes to ability to put acres in versus what we have on the harvest side in terms of improvements. That maybe you disagree with that. If you do, I would like to maybe get some numbers to put to it. I'm just kind of quantifying it from a qualitative standpoint. So let me know if you feel any different about that. The Saskatchewan government report also says that calving is coming to an end, and livestock producers will soon begin assessing their pastures and moving cattle out when they can. Producers who are running low on feed for their livestock have already started moving some of their herd to pasture to help reduce feed consumption. The cool weather throughout April was good for moisture retention, but it did not allow pastures to rapidly regrow. Warm weather and some light rains would be appreciated by many livestock producers to ensure cattle have adequate feed while on pasture. And speaking of cattle out on pasture and talking about the beef markets, when we come back here on RealAg on the weekend, we're going to hear from Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, Saskatchewan. She ranches in the southwest corner in East End, and she's going to talk to us about what's going on in these global cattle markets when we come back. You're listening to RealAg on the weekend here on 980 CJME and 650 CKOM.
Hey, I'm Kelvin Hepner, and I just wanted to give you a heads up about a new project that we are working on here at RealAgriculture together with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, or CAPI. We're calling it the Ag Policy Connection. Stay tuned. The first episodes of the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by RealAgriculture and the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. They'll be showing up here on RealAgriculture and in your podcast feed on your podcast player shortly.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to RealAgriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Every 2 weeks at RealAgriculture.com, I talk to Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. And actually, we've been doing this every 2 weeks, going back to probably like about 2010. So like for 14 years, or 13 years, I got to be able to do math. 13 years. I have been talking to Anne Wasko every 2 weeks. She's a dear friend and one of the most knowledgeable people about the fundamentals of the cattle market and what's going on in the beef trade that I have ever encountered. And so I really enjoy our conversations. I have learned so much about the beef business from Anne. And if you're in the cattle industry, you know Anne very, very well. I don't even need to tell you how awesome she is. So, yesterday, I was able to talk to her in one of our every 2 week discussions for the beef market update. And here is the conversation that I had with Anne Wasko.
Okay, well, here, of course, we've come into May, so you expect that our spring highs for the U.S. are likely behind us by the looks of things. In the south, pretty quiet test down in the south, Texas, Kansas, 170. That would be a couple bucks lower if that's how we finish up. In the north, looking pretty steady, 172 to 178, kind of expect an average around 176. So no big surprises, kind of a quiet week, to be honest with you. The choice cutout It also looks like it's likely topped. You hate to call these things too soon, but it was $4 lower this week, just under 306. That's still a great price, especially if you go back to pre-COVID levels, but certainly off from what it was a week ago. And so kind of thinking that as we start to see the U.S. supplies pick up seasonally, as they do into late spring and summer, that cutout price typically comes off with that. So that's kind of, it's kind of pretty normal what we're seeing going on in terms of timing, in terms of seasonality. Now, locally, the Alberta fed cattle market, very solid again, fully steady, 385 to 390 delivered draft. That's going to keep our weekly average price up near that 272, again, all-time record highs as we've been in for some time. So great news. Again, carcass weights in Canada. Last week's average was 900 pounds on a steer. That's 37 pounds below last year. And we're 9 pounds under the 5-year average. So it's been a long time since we've been able to talk about carcass weights below a year ago, let alone below the 5-year average. So same thing, carcass weights still have some downside. Seasonally, they make their low kind of around the end of June. So expect that weight to still come down some more.
So if you look at that cutout price and you look at the carcass weights, how does those two things and plus maybe some other variables, how does that impact what we're seeing in terms of the slaughter rates out there?
Well, things are certainly slowing down, especially here in Canada. We had a really good slaughter pace through the first quarter, but kind of in April and May, we've seen those levels lighten up as, certainly the supplies out there are smaller. Our on-feed numbers are smaller, as we've talked about. And we've got another report coming out from Canfax later today that I think will say the same thing for our May 1 numbers. So packers are backing their kills off. Last week's kill, just to kind of give you a comparison, compared to the same week last year, was 10% smaller. Now, just breaking down fed cattle versus a cow kill, for example, though, year to date, our fed cattle kills down 5%. Our cows are still up 7%.
Whoa!
Now, most of that was in the first quarter, though, Shaun. Even the cow kill is slowing up here in the last few weeks. But talk about cow price. Even with that cow kill up 7%, which usually you got more supply, you're going to have a lower price. Not the case with cows. Our slaughter cow price average, according to Canfax last week, was $150. So that's an average. So you got cows on either side of that. That's matching the all-time high of 2015. So a super, super cow market in terms of these cow prices.
What's leading to that? Like what's pushing that to happen?
Well, North America-wise, we've still got strong demand for, our lean beef, what makes up our hamburger supply, if you will. So prices around, North America are still very strong in terms of what's required. And even though our cow kill is up here, it's still not a big number from a North American perspective. So I think that's the balance. And cow beef is kind of a global protein, right? So in terms of North America prices versus, say, Australia, New Zealand, Uruguay, all those kind of comparative prices.
Any update from an export perspective that we can chat about?
Yeah, we're getting dribbles of data in. I know that federal strike kind of slowed things up a little bit, but we did just get March live cattle exports in. So I thought the biggest one that jumped out at me was fed cattle exports from Canada to the U.S. in the month of March. We're up 49%. So we saw 40,000 head of fed cattle go south in the month of March alone. Year to date, just to kind of put it in perspective for first quarter, fed cattle exports up 14%. So that was another reason, I think, Shaun, that we got cleaned up so quickly and we were able to get current much more quicker than we really struggled with last year. On the flip side, feeder cattle exports in March were half of last year's pace. There was only 10,000 head of feeders head south, and our first quarter total tally is about 23,000. That's down 68%. And just to finish up on the live cattle, for Q1 slaughter cow exports were down 24% at about 42,000 head all year. That's about 14,000 head of cows going south per month. So the big news in my mind was that fed cattle exports.
Okay, so the feeder cattle exports being lower than a year ago, what market dynamic has flipped that? What's happened?
That dynamic, I think, Shaun, is cattle feeders in Canada have to keep the cattle in Canada. We know these supplies are tightening. Pen space continues to grow, especially in southern Alberta, if you've been looking around lately, in terms of expansion. And as our cattle supplies tighten, based on the cattle herd and our beef cow numbers, there's going to be tight competition for feeder cattle. And I think that's the storyline for the rest of this year. So they're going to do all they can, I expect, to keep what supplies they can here in Canada.
If we could expand our cow herd and retain heifers like we are good at building more pen space, that would be real. If you could find the big solution, that'd be great.
Well, and that's a good point, Shaun. That'll be something that we watch, even with today's on-feed report for Western Canada, that heifer placement piece. So we've talked about that over the last 2 years. We've placed all the heifers on feed and fed them or exported them. That's going to change. And so that'll be the key piece that we watch in this data going forward. When do we start to see those heifer placements slow up? And once they slow up, that's an indication, hey, they're staying back on the ranch and something might be changing. So there's some things we can watch.
Speaking of the ranch, what's the grass condition out there like in Western Canada? What have you been seeing and hearing from some of your peers?
Well, again, variation's the key word. I can speak quite positively about what's going on here in Southwest Saskatchewan for a change. We've had some great moisture here, especially in the last week, and so things are popping. But I certainly know that there's areas that you get into central and northern Alberta that are not in the same boat. So again, that variation, but kind of selfishly, I'm talking from a pretty good place here in Southwest Saskatchewan.
Well, that's good because the southwestern Saskatchewan has been one of the spots where we've been talking about how it's in such bad condition. So that's a real positive.
This is well, looking out the window today, it's looking quite green and Irishly.
Really?
Okay. My new word.
I'll roll with it. I'm not going to wordsmith you at all. And you mentioned Northern Alberta, the fires. We had Brad DeBow, the general manager with the Alberta Beef Producers, on RealAg Radio earlier this week. The displacement of livestock and trying to manage that and keep people safe and animals out of harm's way. Some people, in the middle of calving. It's just your heart goes out to all those people. Absolutely. And of course, just a reminder from a stats perspective, Alberta's our biggest province in the country in terms of where the cow herd and our herd resides. So a lot of those are, certainly in central and northern Alberta. So it's a big area in terms of the impact of numbers as well. Yeah. And thanks so much for joining us here this week. Really appreciate it. All the best to you and have a great weekend. Okay. Thanks. You too, Shaun. That was Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. And Anne mentioned there some of the rain that fell in Saskatchewan here this week. It's a very welcome sight for some of those ranchers that have been dealing with significant drought the past number of years. And there still is some areas that are quite dry. Hopefully some of that love gets spread around by Mother Nature. We got to take a quick break. We'll be back with more of RealAg on the weekend here on 980 CJME and 650 CKOM.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com, and encourage you over this weekend to go to RealAgriculture.com and see all the great content that our team is putting together for you. And it's a great way to be really tapped into all things Canadian agriculture. So we don't just have content there for Saskatchewan. It also will, kind of stretch yourself to learn about what's going on in other parts of the prairies, as well, of course, in Eastern Canada, where there is a lot happening as well. We are Canada's only ag media company under one banner of Real Agriculture, and we really, really have a deep passion for this industry and making sure that you have the information and the insights that really matter to your farm business. So check out realagriculture.com. And while you're there, go realagriculture.com / subscribe. And there you can sign up for our Western Canadian update that comes out 6 days a week. It's an email to your inbox to make sure you have that information right at your fingertips. So you don't have to be prompted to go to realagriculture.com. You get it in your inbox and you just go and you can choose the stories that you find interesting. Got a lot of written stories in there. We've also got, of course, audio and video as well. So check that out, realagriculture.com /subscribe. It is free. And I know you love free stuff as well. Earlier this week on RealAg Radio, we had a great discussion with Ranulf Glanville. Now, he's a market analyst with Grainfox. And Ranulf does a great job. And we talked about some of the geopolitical issues right now facing the industry. Okay, so some of the stuff that we hit on is the overall economy. We also hit on what's going on in China. And we hit on Russia and the Ukraine and this Black Sea grain deal that seems a little bit elusive, at least at this point. The renewal, May 18th, it expires. And so what does that really mean going forward? And, I enjoy talking about some of these geopolitical factors and how they impact some of the commodity flow and the overall markets and, the chess game, so to speak, that is happening. And it's a serious chess game, especially when we talk about something like Ukrainian lives as they defend their home country and try to fight off the Russians. We also are concerned about what potentially could be the pushback from China when it comes to some of our agricultural commodity exports out of Canada into China. And will we see restrictions placed on us that are new as a bit of a tit for tat, so to speak, when it comes to the fact that Canada made the Chinese diplomat who has been really kind of caught red-handed in terms of the interference in Canadian political matters, okay? And it's of great concern. I think Canada's made the right decision, although it may negatively impact the industry of agriculture that I firmly I'm a believer in and a champion of and an advocate for. This was the right decision that Canada had to make. And most producers and farmers that I have talked to about this agree wholeheartly that Canada had to make this decision. Could it impact some of our exports? Absolutely. We got to think about the bigger picture is kind of what I've heard from most of you. Now, wrapping all of that talk into a nice, neat little package, and you can hear that full interview if you go to realagriculture.com or listen to Wednesday's episode of Real Ag Radio. You can get wherever you get your podcasts. I asked Ranulf about how all of this impacts what you do with some of your new crop marketing and trying to steer through that noise. Here's what Ranulf had to say.
Well, in terms of the potential trade issues, I don't think that's something that farmers can game plan for. It's out of their hands. And there are a lot of other factors that we're watching, whether it's the weather, whether it's opportunities to make sales while most other farmers are distracted with planting and field work, for example, whether it's opportunities to pick away at new crop sales where there are attractive opportunities available. I do think that in a general sense, for farmers trading headlines of the day is not the best idea. Instead, I think really, until proven otherwise, we want to focus our marketing decisions on fundamental factors, supply and demand for the various crops. If you're into charts, technical analysis, and other things of that nature. So I would be cautious about trading too much on the headlines, specifically when there is so much wiggle room for a solution that doesn't actually turn out to impact agricultural markets.
So pay closer attention to that wheat harvest number in the U.S., the corn yield or planting numbers that are coming out. That you'd be better off to follow that than you would be to speculate on how the market reacts to the Ukraine-Russia grain deal. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I mean, I think in terms of the market specifically, for example, just lately we've seen very significant progress in U.S. corn and soybean planting progress, and this has put some downward pressure on corn and soybean futures after their rally last week. And so, that's the kind of thing where we can look and we can see the weather forecast. We can see that U.S. planting is likely to remain strong over the next couple of weeks. It looks like at this time, U.S. corn and soybean crops will be seeded in good time. And so, that's a situation where you could look and you could say, well, if I have a final little bit of old crop soybeans or old crop corn and I don't want to hold it to see what happens with summer weather, just as an example, maybe that's something you want to look at selling if you can still get a good cash price. I would be much more inclined to do something like that, or to sell some wheat into a pre-harvest rally like we're seeing now with some of the hard wheat futures. And, in that situation, whether or not there is a Black Sea extension of the export corridor, we have an opportunity there to really monitor how the market is behaving as those news stories develop. So if the export corridor falls apart and wheat futures fall on the news, they do the unexpected, that would be a sign that I would be concerned that that's no longer a bullish factor. The market's already discounting that. And maybe at that point, it might be an opportunity to look at adding to sales for old crop wheat as an example. That kind of thing, as opposed to just saying, oh no, the world is ending. There's going to be this retaliation. So therefore I should go out and aggressively sell canola as an example.
Yeah, be careful with that kind of all or none sort of strategy. Hey, Ranulf, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome.
That was Ranulf Glanville of Grainfox providing his perspectives on your marketing plan going forward. Curious what you think about this whole idea of Canada basically excommunicating or sending home this Chinese diplomat based on some of this interference that has been happening, and CSIS has been tracking for as the story says in the Globe and Mail on Friday. This has been going on for 2-3 years. They've been tracking this person, so this seems to be a relatively easy decision. Although Canada tends not to act very fast here, as Kelvin Hepner on our team pointed out to me, Canada still hasn't basically sent home some of the Russian diplomats, never mind this one from China. So what do you think? Did Canada make the right decision? Should they maybe have thought about trade more so in this decision? Was there a different path, or is this just about right? Let me know. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg feedback line. You dial this number, you press the number 3, and you leave me a message. You don't even have to come on the air live here. You just leave me a message. It's great stuff. 855-776-6147. Let's take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg on the weekend. When we come back, we're talking about your favorite, manure. Bit of a stinky subject. You're listening to 980 CJME and 650 CKOM.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School. Presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
You know, one of the best parts about this job is having the interaction with the audience, and love your comments and your thoughts, your perspectives, and also questions, right? And so then I can take those questions and pose them to some of the guests. On a recent episode of RealAg Radio, I got a question from the audience. It was about manure. And so I posed it on Agronomic Monday on RealAg Radio to Peter Wheatpea Johnson. Here's that conversation. Hey, I got a question here from an audience member. And there's a lot of variables to this question, so we're going to have to sort of talk about those. But the question is simply this: how often should I be spreading manure on my land? Now, here's what comes to mind here, Pete. 1 is type of manure. 2, soil type. 3, weather conditions. Would 4 be current fertilizer level profile that's already there? What else? What am I missing? What else?
So I'm not sure you're missing anything, Shaun, but you got it in the wrong order.
Okay, that's good. I like when I'm corrected. Go ahead.
So number 1 is your soil test. And when you say, how often should I be spreading manure? And maybe I'm not 100% sure what the question is. Like, should I spread it twice a year on that acre or once a year? But if you're really looking at where you get the maximum bang for the buck, and Chris Brown from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food here is showing some calculations. If you have a low soil test, the value of that manure is massive because you need the phosphorus, you need the potash, you need the nitrogen, you might need some of the micronutrients as well. But you need all those things because you're giving up yield if you don't get those soil test levels up into the medium category. And you and I have talked about this before, but the difference between a low soil test, fertilized the very best you can, versus a medium soil test, fertilized properly, is 13 bushels of corn, 10 bushels of wheat, and 5 bushels of soybeans. And there's no way you can make up that difference other than getting those soil tests to that medium level. And so if you put manure on a high soil test, the value of the phosphorus is 0. The value of the potash is 0. Well, maybe not 0, but really low. And the only benefit you're getting is the nitrogen. And so when you say, how often should I apply manure? Well, look at your soil test. If your soil test is very high, find a field to put it on where it's very low. Make a deal with a neighbor, whatever. But that's really what drives it. And then when you're looking at the nitrogen component, it's really looking at, like, what is your soil organic matter? How is that nitrogen cycling? How often should you put it on? Probably 1 year in 3, 1 year in 2 is the most that probably you need to go there. Meanwhile, you've got a big, lots of hogs in a barn or dairy cows, whatever. Man, it's just really tempting to continue to put it on close to the barn because that's where it costs the least. But that's really where you're going to get the least bang from the buck because those soil test levels are already really high.
What happens if I do over apply? What am I risking?
You're a huge environmental concern. It depends on what crop you're growing. Man, you over apply and you grow wheat, it's going to lodge. You grow soybeans, they will lodge as well and not yield as well as if you don't put that manure on. Manure is a wonderful resource, but too much is a negative. I've actually seen farms here in Ontario where they just continued to apply manure at too high a rate for too long, and then they got to the point where their yields were, barely 50 or 60% of their neighbors that did not have manure. And you can definitely over apply. There's no question about that. And it becomes a phosphorus problem moving off that field. It becomes a nitrogen problem moving off that field, or an emissions problem. So yeah, if you over apply long term, it can have some really significant negative impacts. That's pretty rare because most of us don't want to get there, and we're smart enough not to get there. And thankfully, it doesn't happen very often. But I've seen it, and it can be amazing how much negative impact it has.
So talk about the differences between the types and things to just consider from an agronomic standpoint. Quickness to action, components. If you look at between poultry, beef, pig, we could throw sheep in there. What are the differences?
So the real differences become what form is the nitrogen in. So poultry manure, a lot of it is ammonium nitrogen or ammonia nitrogen. And so you get the biggest bang from the buck putting that on in the spring. Now you got to get it in the ground because that ammonia nitrogen can disappear really quickly, but it's readily available. It's just like commercial fertilizer. So huge benefits if you can avoid compaction and get it on in the spring. If you put it on in the fall, if you put it on in August after your winter wheat crop, well, a lot of that ammonia nitrogen never makes it to the next crop. So from a timing standpoint, look at the source of, or the form the nitrogen is in the manure. If you're talking about beef pack manure, it's the exact opposite. It's almost all in the organic form. The carbon to nitrogen ratio is probably too high. It's probably 30-1 or 40-1. It means that there's no available nitrogen. And the worst thing you can do is put it on in the spring, even if you didn't compact the soil or delay your planting, because if it's 40-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, it's actually going to take some of your fertilizer nitrogen to break that down. And so you need more nitrogen to grow the crop, not less. So that manure you want to put on in August so that it has time to go through some breakdown cycles and change that carbon to nitrogen ratio and make that manure have more value. So it really is looking at form of nitrogen in whatever type of manure you're talking about. For dry manure, it's looking at the carbon to nitrogen ratio. And for liquid manure, it's really about uniformity of application. Get it in the ground, like injection if you can. There's just so many things about liquid manure that get really challenged from a uniformity of application standpoint.
That is Real Agriculture's agronomist Peter Pete Johnson talking to me on a recent show of Real Ag Radio. The consistency, that's, when you think about the consistency of manure. And so the question is too, like, are you getting some of that manure tested for nutrients? Do you find it hard to find manure? Like, obviously it can, especially from a cattle perspective, it can only be transported so far. There is some sort of, economic return in terms of some of that, or limitations, I guess, because it is so bulky. So yeah, interesting. I would love your feedback on that and how you are using it in terms of your agricultural operation to, especially with some of the cost of fertilizer the last couple of years, a lot more focus on, how do I get some and how do we get hands on it and what are some of the rates and how often and all of that. So all of that conversation stemmed directly from, somebody out there in the audience asking good questions, which are all good conversations start with a good question. There's no doubt about that. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can find us, of course, on all the different social media platforms. Make sure on YouTube, you check out our YouTube channel and you hit subscribe. Okay, it's very simple, just a click of a button. You don't have to do anything, fill out a form or anything. You just click subscribe. We've got a great vault of agronomic machinery and like just general news and market videos that I think you're really going to enjoy. That's on our YouTube channel. And of course, I already mentioned RealAgriculture.com, of course, as well. The Real Ag feedback line is 855-776-6147. For everybody that is trying to get some seeding done this weekend, stay safe, right? Get tired, nap time. Take a nap. Naps are good. Remember that. It's not a sign of weakness at all. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag on the weekend. It is great to be again here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week. Cheers, everybody.